think that's you, Vladimir. I don't think I'm recording. Perfect. Let me just change my view. Okay, so as people are still coming in and getting settled, we would like to go ahead and begin this webinar, and we welcome you all tonight, Sunday evening here, I guess afternoon in California, and early morning in New Zealand, where Jean is joining us from. But welcome to All Life is Yoga, and this is a series of programs hosted by the LaGrasse Center here in Fountain Inn, South Carolina. Our center is founded on the integral yoga teachings of Sri Aurobindo and the Mother. And I'm Rade. I am joined by my colleague Vladimir Yatsenko, and we will both be facilitating the panel discussion today. I am also joined by our three esteemed panelists, Jean McElhaney, Vikas Srivastava, and Brant Cortright. And let me take a few minutes just to introduce each panelist. So I'm going to start with Jean. Jean is a licensed clinical social worker and professional counselor. She has worked with people experiencing trauma, anxiety, depression, and grief. And in addition to working with individuals, she also facilitates groups on topics such as mindfulness meditation, stress management, and the transformation of anger, shame, and guilt. So she is also a certified trainer with the Center for Nonviolent Communication and facilitates workshops for cultivating empathy and authenticity, making powerful requests, and also navigating conflict. So Jean joins us, as I mentioned earlier, from New Zealand, where she has lived since 2012, and she has been collaborating with us on our current workshop, Living an Integral Life. So welcome, Jean.
Thank you.
Vikas is the Director of Employee Relations and Mindfulness at Legacy Early College right here in Greenville, South Carolina, about a half hour away. He has been a professional educator and public speaker for over 20 years with an emphasis on mindfulness, nonviolence, growth mindset, creative confidence, and life purpose. At Legacy Early College, Vikas is instilling the culture of nonviolence, greater self-worth and vulnerability, and the ability to be present in the classroom. He instructs both parents and teachers in his Being Mindful theory and practices, and has actually been offering his Being Mindful classes at LaGrasse since its early opening in 2019. So welcome, Vikas. And Brant Cortright, who is joining us from California, is a professor emeritus with the California Institute of Integral Studies. He is a licensed clinical psychologist with a private practice in San Francisco, and also has an online coaching and consultation practice focused on brain health, anxiety, and depression. Dr. Cortright is the author of Integral Psychology, Yoga, Growth, and Opening the Heart, as well as Psychotherapy and Spirit. His most recent book was a #1 Amazon offering, Holistic Healing for Anxiety, Depression, and Cognitive Decline. LaGrasse has had the honor of hosting Dr. Cortright on several of our New Perspectives webinars, and we are so very happy to have you back here tonight with us, Brant. So welcome all three panelists, and again, it's just truly an honor to have you as part of this All Life is Yoga program and on such an important topic as compassion. And today, as we talk about compassion, not just compassion for others, but as well receiving compassion from others and self-compassion. So we've asked our panelists to share their perspectives and insights on this topic, as well as how compassion shows up in their personal and professional life. And of course, we're always very interested in any practices they might suggest to help us cultivate a deeper sense of compassion for others and for oneself. So we will be having time at the end of this webinar for questions and answers. So at any time, please feel free to use the Q&A box rather than the chat box to post any of your questions. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and Vikas, turn it over to you as our first panelist.
Thank you, Rade. Thank you, Vladimir. Thank you to LaGrasse and everyone who makes the center happen. And thanks to everyone who's here. Brant, Jean, honored to be here. Humbled to speak first. I usually prefer to speak after them because just out of respect for their wisdom. But here we are. So let's jump in. Compassion has been an ongoing theme. And I'm going to be honest with my journey. In my own practice, the practice of what we call metta meditation or loving kindness meditation was the hardest part for me. For most people, that's their point of entry. That's the part they like. For me, it was a little bit difficult. I just felt very kind of abstract, a little forced, a little kind of foofy. Like, okay, we're just going to send out good vibes. So it's been an interesting journey, and I feel my journey began through nonviolence, and that's how my journey got into mindfulness and a lot of other things. And nonviolence is interesting. It really saddles that boundary between justice, political justice, as well as spirituality. And that's where we find that overlap. So what I wanted to talk about was how it's resurfaced recently as employee relations in human relations and kind of having to facilitate intensity, facilitate conflict, facilitate trauma, the trauma of being a person of color in a system where police brutality has always been going on, but now because of technology, we're very aware of it. The Capitol building, George Floyd, these issues of diversity, equity, inclusion have really come to a forefront. Issues of sexism have come to a forefront. Issues of just equity amongst people with different sexual preferences and sexuality, and just amongst people of all differences. And so we've had to facilitate different conversations, and they get really intense. And nobody wants to hear the word neutral. Nobody wants to hear the word keep your calm. Everyone wants to fight. This is like the time of fight. We all want to kind of fight for our view. So when we work with the DEI stuff, the diversity, equity, and inclusion, I absolutely understand the intensity, the trauma, and I understand the history of working through nonviolence. And here we are again, kind of having the same discussion, literally the same discussions around certain injustices. And so the question becomes, well, how do we have compassion? How do we have compassion in this day and age when we've kind of talked about it, we've gone over it? And what came to me and what continually comes to me and always deepens is whatever it is that we do, we have to drink the intention first. We have to drink that intention. And so even if we were like, if I'm going to kill an ant, this millisecond before I kill that ant, something goes through my body, a certain fierceness comes, and I pick up something and I kill the ant, or I squash the ant. It's not a feeling of joy. Even such a small thing as killing an ant, like you can, if you really are sensitive to that, you'll feel this certain energy, this thought. You have to drink that before you kill the ant. And in the same way, when we hate someone, or when we get angry at someone, or when we get angry enough that we would be willing to be violent against someone, we have to drink that. It's like a potion, right? We have to drink that potion before we can do that work. And so the first piece is really just asking ourselves, is that the goal? So when we lack compassion, we have to ask ourselves, is that the goal? What am I drinking in this situation right here? And the other, as we become sensitive to this whole process of us becoming all that we are at every moment, our thoughts and our actions really defining who we are, not only on a spiritual level, but chemically, all the whatever's releasing in our bodies and all of that. As we reflect deeper and deeper on that, what we begin to notice is what I call parts make the whole. So if you have a glass of milk and you put a drop of poison in the milk, it doesn't mean that that drop of poison is floating around in the glass of milk. The whole glass is poison. So we are made up of small parts, and all those parts make the whole. And whether we look at that as a person and what's happening inside of us, or we look at that as individuals in a society, however we look at that, what we'll notice is as we break things down into smaller parts, we begin to understand the whole. And as we go into that process, if we go deeper into the parts make the whole, we find that we are simply particles, a molecular reality. And in that molecular reality, we are truly, on a physical sense, we are connected to each other. And so what happens is this, what I call this theory of living large, is when we decide to live small. So like we're walking in the street, there's a homeless person and they're looking at us. We're in our car, our air-conditioned car, and there's someone on the street and they've got the sign. We know what's going to happen. This uncomfortable moment of them holding the sign, us passing them by, and either we don't have cash, we don't want to give cash, whatever it is, no judgment, but it's uncomfortable. And we shut off. We don't look. So in that moment of shutdown, we decide to live small. In that moment of shutdown, the minute I stop feeling my surroundings, I decide I'm going to contract my consciousness. And that's where compassion is actually a practice of expanded consciousness. And this is where I feel nonviolence, kind of circling it back round, is key, because in Sanskrit, we have two words. We have Shanti and we have Ahimsa. One is peace, Shanti. The other is Ahimsa, nonviolence, and they're not interchangeable. Peace, we can find peace by closing our eyes. But nonviolence is very different. When we have expanded consciousness, we're not always at peace because there's trouble in the world, but we connect. And in that connection, we realize that the true nature of ourself, which is the molecular reality, the particle reality, that everything is constantly interchanging with everything else. And I'll stop there. I don't know, we'll leave it at that and let the rest unfold.
Sure, and we'll be facilitating some group discussion and Q&A later. But I guess, Vikas, I'm curious, because I know in the last 3 or 4 months you've recently switched to an expanded position at Legacy Early College and into the Human Resource Division and as Director of Human Relationships or Employee Relationships. How does, just on an everyday scenario with the kids, and I think it's K through 12, how does compassion come through both in working with the kids as well as the instructors and administrators? What have you kind of learned from or experienced or received a new perspective from this position you've taken, as now you're working with these concepts every day in a kind of a real life, real time scenario?
Yeah, no, and I appreciate the work. The work keeps me very, very real. So we're the largest Title I school in South Carolina, and Title I means they qualify for free lunch. So it's a very low socioeconomic community with the highest homicide rate. So, to practice what we practice, it's really put to the test. The essence, I think, of the practice is understanding things are not personal. So I always say I've reduced my entire practice to 2 questions. Why are you taking it personally? And why are you taking it personally? And on the one hand, it's like, well, what they're doing is not personal. And on the other hand, the fact that you took it personal is personal. So let's talk about that part. When we talk about that part, one of the techniques that has been proven to really be useful to all ages of people is asking yourself, how is this other person making me feel? If that's where the compassion is, right? So someone is frustrating us, and I'll give a quick example. I was teaching an advisory group of young boys, and these were actually some of the more challenging men in the school, boys in the school. And so one of the boys comes in with his earbuds in his ears, and they know they're not supposed to have that in the class. I mean, that's a rule. And he had it so loud you could hear the music on the outside. And he comes in and he sits down, and I said, okay, you know what? I'm going to let him do his thing, and when the bell rings, he'll take it out. The bell rang, and he just sat there, and everyone's looking at me. They're looking at him, looking at me, like, okay, what's mindfulness guy going to do, And so I looked at him and I said, hey, man, go ahead and pull your earbuds out. And he looked at me and he said, huh? I said, pull your earbuds out. And he pulled one out. And he said, what did you say? I said, you need to take those out. And he goes, yeah. And he puts it back in and just sits down. Now, okay, we've got a challenge, right? We got the student challenging the teacher. So in this moment, an impulse would be, okay, you're challenging me, so I'm going to show you who has control. Now, this is what I call the Kung Fu technique. That's my impulse. Okay, you challenge me, you're taking away control, I'm going to show you who has control. Now, if I ask myself, how is he making me feel? Well, he's kind of making me feel small. He's kind of making me feel like I don't have control. And he's kind of making me feel unrespected, like we don't have mutual respect, we don't have a relationship. This is the Kung Fu part. When you can understand how another person is making you feel, you understand how they feel. He's experiencing a lack of control. He's experiencing a lack of relationship. he's experiencing a lack of respect. Now, okay. So if he's experiencing a lack of control, the last thing I need to do is take away the control. If he's experiencing lack of respect, the last thing I need to do is disrespect him. So guess what we did? We ignored it. And I just taught the whole class. And everyone was kind of tripping out, like, wow, Brother V, or Mr., they call me Brother V. Oh, Brother V's just gonna let that go. Then the bell rang and it was time for them to leave. They all got up to leave. I looked at the kid with the earbuds. I said, you hang out, let's talk for a second. He's like, oh, all right, giving me the attitude, arms crossed, facial. I said, come on in my office. We sat down. I was like, you need some water? You need something to eat? He goes, no. I was like, all right. I was like, well, what's really going on? He goes, I was like, well, I feel like we kind of have a different relationship, and this is not usually what it looks like. Then he started to tell me what's going on. He was not, there was a lot of stuff going on in the home life, a lot of stuff going on with his girlfriend. He was feeling disrespected. He was feeling a lack of control, all the things that he was making me feel. So this is how we develop compassion. You simply ask yourself, well, how's this person making me feel? And then that'll tell you how they're feeling. And the second piece, I know we're kind of going over time. I'll go through it quickly. And this works with all ages again, but it's beautiful with young children, like at the elementary school level. I love this one. We talk about parts make the whole, but the way we talk about it is we say, what are the ingredients? And so usually what I do is ask them, has anyone baked a cake and, cookies? And everyone raises their hand. And I say, what goes in that cake or cookie? The only thing they remember is sugar. You have to kind of push them a little. Oh, well, I think there was something else. And oh yeah, there was a flour. Okay, what else? Milk, eggs. Okay. I said, so you must have, did it taste like eggs? I said, no. I said, what do you mean? They said it tasted like a cake. I said, but it must have tasted like milk. You put milk in it. They said, no, it tasted like a cake. I was like, oh, I was like, well, I don't like the taste of flour, so I don't think I would like your cake. They said, it doesn't taste like flour, it tastes like a cake. I said, but that's interesting. All those things went in the cake, but it doesn't taste like that? They said, yeah. I was like, huh. I was like, when somebody is angry and all you see is anger, do you think there might be ingredients that maybe we don't see? What do you think are the ingredients of anger? We start talking about it. Loneliness, depression, tired, feeling hungry, argument. All this stuff happens at home. Oh, I was like, and maybe we don't see that because it's like part of the cake. And they go, yeah. I was like, so if someone's angry with you, would you be angry back? And they said, no. I was like, what would you do? They're like, well, maybe they need a hug. Maybe they need to be told they have a friend. And these are real responses that we get back. So I break it down to part, make the whole. One, how is that person making you feel? That's how they're probably feeling. And two, what are the ingredients? That's my recipe for compassion.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you so much, Vikas. And for that example, we were just finishing our Living an Integral Life series, and Jean took the last session on Thursday, and she actually walked the group through this exercise of feelings. Of what are you feeling? Therefore, what are they feeling? And ignoring the strategy per se, but it's very, very powerful technique, and to hear it in practice and that you're employing it every day at Legacy College, that's wonderful. So it's real applicable in your situation. So thank you so much. And with that, Jean, I'm just going to go ahead and turn it over to you.
Thank you so much. I enjoy being in the middle because I can kind of play off of what already came and set the stage for what's coming. And I wanted to say I'm just really have been enjoying this morning, tuning into this quality of compassion and imagining, what's important about it. And I also come to it from many different pathways. So I come to it from psychology, and there's this whole burgeoning field of compassionate focused psychotherapy techniques. And I come to it through spirituality. So I'm also an interspiritual, interfaith ordained minister, and compassion is something that's a value at the root of all the major traditions. And I absolutely come to it through the pathway of nonviolence, through the teachings of Gandhi, through the teachings of Marshall Rosenberg, who came up with nonviolent communication. And that's nonviolent communication, which I will probably call NVC because I'm used to that abbreviation. That's how I'm connected with Lagros. So I will steer my comments in that direction. So when I think about compassion, I think, well, what is this thing we call compassion? And for me, and I think this is the definition, it starts with a kind of a sense of empathy or connection with what's going on with the other person. But it doesn't stop there. It deepens. The calm is the with, calm passion. And then the passion is that energy, that movement that says, I want to help, I want to do something. And all of this is predicated on the idea of interdependence and unity. It was what Vikas was talking about. There's really only one of us here, and we're all parts of this greater whole. So if I help you, I'm helping us, and that helps me. We're all in this together. And it's that place where presence, it has to start with some kind of presence, some kind of awareness, some kind of mindfulness that's just aware of what's going on, and then that intention to be aware. And then from there, it moves us to the empathy and then to the action. But where does this all live in me, in us? So there's an element of mind, of attending, but there's this element of soft heart. So for me, when I'm not in compassion, I'm in that place of thinking and judging and blaming and thoughts about what's wrong and whose fault is it? All those kinds of things. Who should be doing what? How should the world be different? How should life be different? How should they be different? Or even how should I be different if I'm judging myself? When I move to compassion and I find that sense of connection, that sense of being with, then I drop into soft heart. It's like my heart softens, widens, opens. Something happens in that process. So I want to be with, I want to move toward. What am I moving toward? I'm moving toward the tender places. I'm attending to the tender places. And I'm wanting to I'm moving toward life, actually, right? I'm moving toward that message that life is sending, that something is wanting attention. What is it? All right, so nonviolent communication has these methods, and they're also very related to the steps of mindful self-compassion that Kristen Neff talks about. She actually refers to nonviolent communication in her book about self-compassion. So there's a lot of overlap between them. And it all also affects the brain. You know, when we tune into this quality of compassion, it's good for our brains, our bodies, our hearts, our relationships. So those are the reasons why we do it. But the steps I want to say from nonviolent compassion have to do with, first, what's going on? How do I feel about it? And what am I longing for? Or what am I needing? There are many different words we can use, but what am I needing? What am I valuing here? What seems to be missing can often be that question. So in the example that Vikas gave, there was that quality of respect that seemed to be missing in the field somehow. So once I tune into that, I'm like, oh, that lives in me too, you know? And if I can fill myself up with that quality so that I'm radiating out more of what I want instead of coming from that lack place, I tune into that quality. And then the action part of it is, oh, how can I contribute to that quality being more in the world? What can I do that will mean the world has more respect, that I'm experiencing more respect, or they're experiencing more respect, or whatever it is? So just to recap that, it's awareness of what's going on, the feelings associated with that, the universal needs that connect me with everybody else. We all want things like respect. We all want things like care. We all want to matter and to be seen. And there's a whole bunch of these universal needs, but those are just a few examples. And then what might I request of myself or of other people so that there's more of these beautiful life qualities, there's more of this beautiful divine life energy in the world. So Marshall Rosenberg would say, how can we make life more wonderful? And compassion is a very big part of that. It's a very big gift in these practices from psychology and from nonviolence and from nonviolent communication all can help us do that. So that process that I went through, that's the practical tool that I can offer, is to go through that process. What happened? How am I feeling? What am I needing? What can I do about it? Or what can I ask others to do about it? And how that might work in my own life. In this present moment, I'll give you an example. So in this moment, if I'm not in self-compassion, I could go to self-judgment and I could say, oh, I'm not doing this right. I don't know enough to be on this panel. Oh no. And I could judge myself and get all caught up in that. And I've had moments of that, right? But if in this moment I live self-compassion, I can say, oh, how am I feeling? Well, I notice my heart is beating a little bit faster than normal. I can drop into that mindful place of being with myself in this. And I can remember that other people feel the same kind of thing. Other people, humanity often feels this sense of anxiety because we want acceptance, we want to contribute, we want to be effective and useful. And when I drop into that, then I can kind of relax and go, okay, yeah, that's what matters to me. How can I contribute? How can I have more of those qualities? Oh, well, maybe I'll give this example. Maybe this example from this own present moment will be a contribution to others and help me connect with them and be useful. So, yeah, that's what I've got for this moment. I'm open to questions. Thank you.
Good. Thank you. Thank you so much, Jean. I was thinking nonviolent communication. So communications is both the language or the words that we use, that we speak, as well as listening, right? There's that two components of that communication. And I'm wondering if you could just say a few words about the words we choose to use in situations and how we can use, or what should we use, and what type of words can we use in a more compassionate way. That's not really coming out right. How to be more sensitive to the words that we use so that it's aligned with this inner compassion that you're speaking with, because oftentimes things come out and we don't understand that words have power. So I would be curious to if you could just say a few words about that.
That's a great question. Thank you. So the first part is, it's never really about the words. It's really about the intention. Is my intention to connect, or is my intention to correct or to judge or to blame? That's actually more important than any of our words. It's the energy that we bring. And then as far as the words themselves, really it's a practice. It's a practice of learning to attend to, are we using words that are coming from a place of judgment or evaluation? Even, words like lazy, even a word like disrespectful, that's a judgment. That's me making a judgment that you're being disrespectful. And if I abandon all kind of sense that you make me feel anything and I take responsibility for my feelings, and I say, wow, I'm feeling kind of anxious here, or I'm feeling a sense of separation from you, right? I'm feeling sad, actually. I'm feeling sad right now because I'm not experiencing a sense of respect between us. And I'm wondering if we could talk about that. So in terms of being aware of our words, it's a spiritual practice. I find it's a very rigorous spiritual practice of attending to my words. And am I taking responsibility for my thoughts and my judgments? If I have, they come up all the time, right? We're made this way. We have thoughts and judgments But then can I own it? Can I say, well, this is what I'm thinking, instead of saying it as if it's the truth, you know? So, and in terms of doing that practice, certainly there are lists and lists and lists online about feelings. There are lists of feelings words and lists of needs words, and there are practice groups, and there's all kinds of things. But it just as a simple way, it's just attending to, am I sharing my thoughts, or am I sharing my emotions, my feelings, and what I'm wanting? And to try to focus more on what we want than on what we don't want. Yeah.
Wonderful.
I hope that helps.
Absolutely. And I just love what you say with about the intent. It all starts with the inner intention, because we all are compassionate beings by nature. We're born that way. We have that within us. It's deep within us. It's part of our of who we truly are. And so connecting with that inner compassion first is required before we can express it, and words come after that connection happens. Good. Thank you, Jean. Very nice. And Brant, I'll just turn it over to you now.
Okay, thank you. And thank both of you. I appreciate just how you are sort of setting the table here. It's very rich. So I'm going to talk about compassion from three different perspectives: from the perspective of integral yoga, from the perspective of psychology, and from the perspective of neuroscience as well. And I can only just scratch the surface here. I guess that's all we can really do in an hour or so. This is a pretty deep subject. So first of all, what is compassion? Right? We talk about it as if we really know what it means. It's really the process of getting another person's suffering and wanting to do something about it, right? It's coming into the passion of somebody else. So it's empathy on the one hand, but empathy is just getting what somebody else is feeling. The desire to really do something about it, to really get their suffering and do something about it, is something in addition to empathy. And I think of that as coming out of some kind of caring. I got a call on my machine, sorry. That comes out of some kind of love, some kind of caring for the other person. So it's a combination of both empathy and love together. And that's what happens when in integral yoga, we open the heart, right? In integral yoga, much of the practice is about opening the heart, because behind the heart chakra is what Sri Aurobindo and the mother called the psychic being, or the evolving soul. And this evolving soul is this fount of light and love and peace. And compassion is simply part of the spiritual bounty which comes as we open the heart. Now, in psychology, compassion is experiencing kind of a moment. Mindfulness has come into psychotherapy in the last 20 years or so, and now as a kind of secondary part of that, compassion is coming in. So we want to have our clients have a compassionate relationship with themselves, as well as other people, but certainly with themselves, because how we relate to ourselves determines how we relate to other people. If I'm really critical of other people, it's because I'm pretty critical of myself. If I'm very loving towards myself, I'm going to tend to have loving relationships with other people. So in that process, it's important to be able to feel. Vikas, you talked a little bit about how it was hard to start off, and I think for many people it is. One of the things psychology has discovered is that in the process of wounding, to defend against that early childhood wounding, we all dissociate to some degree. We move into a mental space and we reduce our feeling capacity. And one of the things that psychotherapy does, or tries to do, is to expand our capacity for feeling. And that means tuning into our bodies, right? That the right brain and the left brain process feeling very differently. The left brain, the dominant hemisphere, processes feeling in terms of a narrative, in terms of words, in terms of a story. But before the left brain knows how to do that, it needs to know what it's feeling. And it gets that from the right brain, who gets it from a primary body sense that happens in the torso area. And if you look at this from the perspective of the chakras, right? The first chakra at the base of the spine is involved with the physical body. 2, 3, and 4 are involved with emotion. And 5 at the throat gets to be what Sri Aurobindo called the externalizing mind. It gets to be more mental. So between the throat and the base of the spine is where feelings happen. And the resonance in the physical body from our subtle body is how feelings happen in the body. And so one of the things in psychotherapy that psychotherapists discovered is that people who change in psychotherapy are people who can come into their body and get a felt sense of what they're actually feeling. And so I think that's an important thing also, is to really work on the process of really feeling, right? That it's not just a mental thing. It's not just something we sort of talk ourselves into. It's something we tune into. Okay, so expanding our capacity for feeling by coming into our body, and particularly coming into the heart, right? One of the primary meditation practices in integral yoga involves centering in the heart. And particularly with some of the higher emotions, they emanate from the 4th chakra, and certainly compassion is part of that process. The third perspective I'd like to just touch on is neuroscience, because compassion is really good for the brain. Jean, you touched on this. It's very good for the brain in a number of good ways. One of the things that happens in compassion is that there's a release of oxytocin. And oxytocin is anti-inflammatory, it boosts immunity, and it's highly neurogenic, meaning it increases our rate of neurogenesis and our rate of neuroplasticity. And when our rate of neurogenesis and neuroplasticity are high, we feel good, we feel strong, we feel alive, we feel awake. When our neurogenic rate slows down, we feel more anxious, we feel depressed, we get brain fog, and we are much more likely to be reactive and non-compassionate. So compassion practices, or heart-opening practices, are good for the spirit, good for the psyche, and also good for the brain. It's a trifecta of health benefits we get here. So let me just stop with that.
Thank you, Brant, and I love that you brought it down to the body and actually feeling, being aware of that feeling. I wanted you brought up integral yoga, and as you know, Sri Aurobindo and the mother spoke about divine compassion, and I wanted to just share a quote that had just a profound impact on me. I wanted to share it with our attendees and all panelists, and not so much a question to you, but just any response or comment or what comes, to mind with this quote would be helpful. So I'm just going to screen share here, and just let me know. You can see it?
Yes.
Okay, so this is actually the mother on divine compassion. And she said, "The passion of pity, with its impure elements of physical repulsion and emotional inability to bear the suffering of others, has to be rejected and replaced by a higher compassion, which sees, understands, accepts the burden of others, and is strong to help and heal, not with self-will and revolt against the suffering in the world and with ignorant accusations of the law of things in their source, but with light and knowledge and as an instrument of the divine in its emergence." So there's a lot here. And truly it is speaking at a level of divine compassion. But I wonder if this is reachable. I mean, it speaks here of us, and through some of these practices and through evolution. If you have any thoughts or comments, Brant, and I would appreciate it.
Yeah, it's a lovely quote. It seems to me the mother is also kind of getting to some of the shadow side of compassion,
Right.
which is pity. Right? The compassion is not pity.
Right.
It's not kind of just feeling sorry for people. It's really about seeing their suffering, bearing it, as she says, really being able to see it, really being able to get it, and then wanting to do something about it. Another part of the shadow side of compassion, I think, is where we not just empathically get the other person's experience, but where we identify with it. And we feel like, that is us. Empathy is not identification. Empathy is where we sort of, we put ourselves in the other person's shoes as if we are them, but knowing that as if is still there. There's a boundary there, as opposed to identification where we just become it. And I think another sort of shadow side of compassion is something I see a lot in the helping professions, which is compassion fatigue, where people are doing compassionate work in the world, but it ends up in burnout. It ends up in where it's just like it's too much, and there's not enough kind of self-care, you could call it self-compassion, to really take care of ourselves, that we need to be in good shape in order to work, in order to be of service to the world. And so compassion fatigue, I think, is another kind of shadow side of all of this that I think just needs to be out there as well.
Great, thank you. It comes to mind too that, oftentimes we may equate compassion with doing something about the situation, stepping in, helping, feeding, hug, whatever it might be. But also compassion is what I call holding space, standing back, letting that person process what's going on and not necessarily feeling you've got to step in and interact and stop the suffering. It's sort of what you were saying, is to understand is the most important thing, knowledge and where they're at, and not to feel that to be compassionate you must interact with the situation, but oftentimes just holding space for that person to go through their process. I mean, obviously it depends on the situation and the age of the person, but that holding space is a powerful way of having compassion for others. So.
Yeah, that's a really good point. That sort of rushing in and trying to fix it often is not the most compassionate thing to do. It's simply being with the person, really holding it. That is the most powerful doing. That is the most powerful action that can occur at times. Yeah.
Thank you for that. And I think I'll thank all three of you. And I would just remind our attendees, please feel free to type in the Q&A box any questions you have. And I'm just going to turn it over to Vladimir, that's just going to open now our general discussion. Vladimir?
Can I comment on the
Oh, sure,
on the
absolutely.
quote?
Sorry.
I just wanted to say that I see a parallel there with that quote and the nonviolent communication, which is rather than revolting against suffering, that would be focused on what we don't want. We want to move toward what we do want. And the flip side of the compassion fatigue is compassion satisfaction. And there's this whole field of post-traumatic growth. And this whole idea that it helps us when we can embody compassion. And it's good for our bodies, it's good for our relationships, but I also wanted to bring in it's good for social change. Because I can look at some issue on the news about refugees or about all kinds of stuff. And I might first need compassion for myself about how overwhelming it is. And I might also feel compassion for the people in that situation and be moved to help in some way. So the compassion operates within myself, between me and other people. And it also operates as a foundation for social change to help the whole world. So I just wanted to bring in
Thank
all
you.
that other
Absolutely.
levels. Thank you.
Yeah, very, very nice. And sorry I didn't give you space there initially. I don't know, Vikas, if any comments there at all or thoughts.
Yeah, I would one, I have two things to say. One, I would love to hear Brant's, I want to know what is the difference, if there's a difference between compassion and nonviolence, because it seems like what we're saying is it's kind of the same, like we're seeing something and we're doing something about it. That's the whole piece of nonviolence. And the other question that I'm going to throw out there is, how do we recognize suffering? When we're talking about being compassionate, and my question is, how do we recognize suffering? When people have privilege, whether it's skin color or gender or any type of privilege, they actually don't see the suffering, and then they become aware of the suffering. And somehow, in my experience, people are able to be compassionate when they can relate to the suffering. So say we're talking about refugee children, and it's like, well, I'm not a refugee, I don't know what it feels like, and they're not following the laws. And then we say, well, what would it feel like if your child was taken away from you and put in a cage? Oh, so then, and then also, like, sometimes something happens and I feel on a spiritual level that the things that are coming in my way, asking for my compassion, is my own path to liberation. It's an opportunity for me to now face something that I need to almost liberate myself from, because I recognize it, because it's in me. That's why I recognize it, because it is me. If it wasn't me, then I won't recognize the suffering. So anyways, I would love to hear, how is compassion different from nonviolence, and how do we recognize suffering?
From the perspective of integral yoga, as I read Sri Aurobindo, Sri Aurobindo believed that nonviolence was the preferred way to go, if at all possible. However, given humanity's current state of evolution, it wasn't necessarily the best way to go. For example, World War II with Hitler. Sri Aurobindo was extremely critical of Gandhi's stance of nonviolence towards the Germans and Hitler, and encouraged Indians to join with British, fighting against the Germans. And the Bhagavad Gita is, of course, you can look at it as kind of a treatise on a war. But what Sri Krishna is advising Arjuna to do is to fight not out of hate, not out of anger, but out of love, right? That if they don't fight that battle, it's going to be a reign of darkness that's going to be terrible for the world. So that sometimes the most compassionate thing, it can be extremely violent. So I think equating nonviolence and compassion it's not quite the same.
It's very nice that we moved to this topic. So basically the second half of this was to discuss these issues among our group, our presenters. So it's lovely that these questions were kind of addressed. And I also want to ask another question, which is coming to me all the time, that we speak about compassion only in negative terms. So we have to identify with somebody's pain, anxiety, help, always help. But there is another part to compassion which we never mention, and that is more positive part, where we rejoice together when somebody is happy, and I can join that happiness and feel it fully within myself. And this is something we don't really do for some reason. We value that negative compassion, help, more than this joining the deeper sense of happiness and realization in others. Somehow we believe that if someone has this idea of, or already reached some level of freedom and happiness and realization, we don't need to be there. Somehow he is already full, completed, so why should we join him? But this is again a wrong notion. There must be some other solution to it. And I may be provoking something unexpected, kind of widening the scope of compassion, calm together passion, feeling together, oneness of feeling, being one in the vital, spiritual, psychic, physical terms, becoming one in life. And that is including also the positive exchange. What do you think about it? It's a provoking thing.
It's lovely. I love that idea. I think of that as kind of resonance, right? With a higher state or with a more joyous state. Just my understanding of the definition of compassion is that it is really feeling into another person's suffering, that it, by definition, is about pain and suffering and wanting to do something about it. And that it would be a different word or a different concept to think about participating with joy or pleasure or beauty or something like that. But this idea of resonance and being able to kind of, and empathy also, of getting somebody else's experience and kind of participating in that. It's wonderful. But just in my understanding, it's different than what compassion is.
Yeah, definitely. It's used totally differently. And Jean was kind of giving this kind of idea of being positive, and also Vikas started with this: whatever you see in others, you feel in yourself. They have, it's like mirroring, you feel that they project onto you this disrespect, that they lack it, they're looking for it. So here, this idea of becoming positive and filling it with positive, this is only proactive, but we don't have it kind of reflective yet. We are not kind of joining the party of joy easily.
Oh, do you know, I actually want to say that I resonate with what Brant said, that I experience compassion as starting from that place of attending to suffering and wanting to alleviate it. And then from there, though, how do we alleviate it? We focus on what we want to see more of, right? We focus on that which we long for. And I'm resonating with what you're saying about, yeah, let's join in the joy party, or let's join in the gratitude and the celebration party. And for me, that has more to do with empathy than with compassion per se. And there are certainly practices in NVC, in nonviolent communication, where we practice empathizing with what's going well. And we might make a request to have someone empathize. And how does it feel that I'm celebrating with you? And by tuning into the needs or the values or the longings that are met and satisfied, we amplify the joy. So I'm a big fan of joining with what's going well and celebrating that. Again, that too is good for our bodies, our hearts, and our brains, and our world, to have more of that. To me, that's more on the empathy end, though, than on the compassion end. How is that to hear, Vladimir?
Wonderful. I know that the problem here also lies in that to really generate true joy is quite difficult. Yeah, we can try to generate some kind of compassion, rather negative association, helping association, pity, or it's easier for us than to really be truly joyful with somebody who is, in this sense, is in joy. There is some problem, psychological, a deeper problem, maybe.
Well, it seems to, and I know Vikas, you want to say something, but when you're speaking of this, Vladimir, maybe what it is just having a true understanding, maybe that joy is just a full appreciation of where that person's at and what they're going through. I can get there. I can get to that true, an appreciation through an understanding, whether that understanding is a higher spiritual level or a deeper spiritual level. And perhaps that brings joy, and perhaps that would emanate out and have some resonance with an impact on the person. But anyways, I'm not part of the panel, but it came to mind, and I'm going to turn it over to Vikas, who is on the panel, and let him comment.
I'm so glad you spoke up, Radhe. It's always awesome to hear from both you and Vladimir. And what's coming to me is perhaps this is kind of the bridge that we need to hear, because when we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, what we're talking about is giving something to a community of people who have not been heard, who have historically not had a voice. And can we celebrate their success now? Because a lot of folks are seeing this as a threat. They're seeing it as a threat that women, all things being equal, if women were to be given a preference, or if people of color were to be given a preference, or if someone with a different sexual preference were to be given a voice, can we celebrate that? Can we celebrate, wow, you have not had a voice for so long. It's so good to hear you speak, because sometimes those voices seem aggressive. Sometimes they seem loud. Sometimes they seem overpowering. And maybe it's just because we're not used to hearing them, or because they've been quiet for so long. So when you speak, I feel like that sounds like, to me, the bridge of actually where we do need to go, where we need to celebrate and have compassion for historically silenced voices that are now getting a voice, versus saying, wait a second, are they taking my space? Are they taking my voice? And in all of that, I would say it sounds like jazz, because in jazz, when a musician takes a solo, you have to have compassion for them. And the reason you have to have compassion for them is if you don't support them, they're going to look really bad. They're going to crumble. Like you really have to have compassion. Like as a drummer, you think about what you're doing, because they're in the limelight, not you. And there's a certain level of and sometimes they might fall, or they might flaw, or they might make a mistake, or they need help. And you have compassion to shine them even more. Like, you're shining, and I understand where you're at. And here, I'm gonna throw a little bit more your way. I'm gonna support you. So I appreciate the conversation, and I do think there's something to be said about this new idea of social equity and having compassion for these people who are historically silenced, and the sense that some folks feel that that's a threat, or that's taking away from them.
Can I just add that, Vikas, I really appreciate the sensibility you're bringing to this whole area. To once again quote Sri Aurobindo, he has this wonderful quote, unity in diversity, right? There's unity and there's diversity. They're both together. And in the diversity conversation, often the unity gets lost, right? It's to solve this problem, it's going to require a spiritual orientation here, because we need both sides of this. It's like in postmodernism, in spirituality, there's the one, right? And for the purposes of the play, the one becomes two, and out of the two, we get the many. And postmodernism starts with the third step, just the many, and skips the other two. And so if you go from there, you just get more and more, you get more and more fragmentation. There's no way. It's like you need to have that, you need to have both poles to the whole thing. And so I just really appreciate the consciousness you're bringing to this work.
Yeah, it's very beautiful. Thank you all for your reflections and thoughts, deeper thoughts on compassion. There is a beautiful passage in Savitri which also kind of triggers my thinking, where when Ashwapati comes to the highest realization and has this experience of absolute, of incommunicable. And there he hears the voice where he realizes everything, and stillness, this absolute incommunicable, which is meets a sheer self-discovery of the soul. This is the highest one can have. A wall of stillness shuts it from the world. A gulf of stillness swallows up the sense. And where everything is already realized, and where he is done with birth and death and work and fate, says Sri Aurobindo. And then he hears the voice O soul, it is too early to rejoice. And there is the whole passage, very beautiful, which I will not read, but there is one passage which is always coming to me back on this topic. Only the everlasting No has neared and stared into thy eyes and killed thy heart. But where is the lover's everlasting yes? That was never realized. That everlasting yes was not realized. And that is something, so with this no, we can go to the extent of full self-realization, but then we have to come back to the world, and that is the compassion, and bring all that richness of realization back to the world and establish that everlasting yes in the world. This is the highest vision of compassion for me, so to say. And of course, there is a long way to go. And our preference is for negative compassion because we deal with it every day. There is nothing else yet. But once we are there, there will be another passage.
Beautiful.
I think, you know, on a general level, once we begin our own process of observing that, it's truly an unraveling, a karmic unraveling, just an unraveling of our spiritual being, whether we believe in multiple lives or just spiritual evolution. Then we have compassion because everything that anyone else is doing is simply an unraveling. Like everyone is unraveling their own karma. Everyone is working towards their own happiness. Even when they're making others miserable, they're really trying to find their own happiness. I mean, they're unraveling their own karma. And if we can see it from that light of, you know, and a big part of this that we actually haven't talked about is not taking things personal. When we take things personal, it's a challenge to be compassionate. So on the one hand, it's like, I'm compassionate because I identify with your suffering. On some level, I have to identify because otherwise I wouldn't recognize it. But on the other hand, it's not personal. Your suffering is your suffering. And actually, we did talk about it, right? I think Jean had said when we really own our own feelings, I feel the way I feel because of me. I make these choices. And when everything you're doing is all you. It's not about me. It's all about you. You might be taking it out in my presence. I might be, you know, you want to make it about me, but it's not about me. We're just all unraveling. We're all unraveling. And sometimes that unraveling one way starts to unravel very quickly in the other way, but there's just compassion for that spiritual journey and evolution.
So I'm aware that we're past the hour. I have a couple comments and I can hold them or I could speak. I just want to check with
Please,
Adi.
Jean, please, go ahead.
Okay. So I want to, yeah, I mean, what's my suffering is my suffering and what's yours is yours. And the place we bridge is on the level of the universal needs, that we all want the same things, but we run into conflict with our different ideas about how to meet those needs. So we all want health and well-being. And one person's idea about how to nurture health and well-being is to be vaccinated. Someone else's choice is not to be vaccinated. But when we have these fights about vaccination, it's like, bam, bam, you know, fights, me against you. When we can come to the level of the universal needs that we share, then we realize, oh, we're in it together. We're back in that place of common humanity, and I can have more compassion, more listening to you than if I am stuck on that level of the strategies. So that's one thing. And the other thing I wanted to mention is to go back to the joy, which is Marshall used to talk about things in a very provocative way. And he would say phrases like, let's learn how to enjoy the jackal show. And the jackal is the word that he gave to violent language, labeling language. And the way that you can find joy, even if there's so-called negative stuff happening, coming at me, if there's judgments coming at me, or even if I'm watching something on the news, the way that I can learn to enjoy that is by first allowing the feelings in the morning, the grief or the anxiety or whatever, and then to go deeper. back to those universal needs, and I can enjoy the life that whatever's happening is pointing to. So even if it's an expression of disrespect, I can enjoy the life and that quality of respect, or whether it's an expression of, whatever it is, an expression that's coming from pain underneath. That pain is pointing to love and life. And if I can learn to listen deeply to the core of it, that place where we all are one, then I can enjoy it. Now that doesn't mean, I sit there and just enjoy the pain. It means then I can tune into compassion, and how can I amplify that which I can feel more joyful about, that which we both want. Anyway, so those are a couple of things that came to me.
Beautiful.
I apologize. I'm going to jump in because there's something in the Q&A that I saw, and I want to address that because I deal with this quite a bit, especially in the school situation, given social media, the news. It really affects the scholars, it affects the staff, it affects the parents, and then it really it just magnifies. It turns into like something really big. Like we had our crossing guard. The school is primarily Hispanic and African American, and the crossing guard wore a mask that said Blue Lives Matters. Now, if you understand where Blue Lives Matters come from, it was a response to Black Lives Matters, and it triggered a lot of people. So, there's a lot of this stuff that just kind of all of a sudden explodes and leads to violence. It leads to a lot of problems. If your question is, there's all this stuff going on in the news media, the president's making a speech, all of this stuff, then I'm going to go to my, very amateur knowledge, especially amongst the experts here of just trauma, that at some point, and when we talked about like having, what is it, compassion, whatever, when you have too much, like people who are doing the work. What was it? Fatigue. So there's all sorts of fatigue. And I think you don't need to know everything that's going on all the time. Like this is kind of part of the disease, because social media and the news cannot report on everything positive. Because otherwise we've been here for 60 minutes. So we have like every minute there was something positive. The fact that we're all here together and alive and breathing. I mean, I don't know how many infinite positive things happened. I couldn't report on it. But I guarantee if the internet crashed, we would report on that one negative piece, because that's just one negative thing that kind of broke this series of positive events. So it's up to us to really know our threshold. And what this reminds me of is dealing with narcissistic relationships. Family members who are narcissistic and having compassion for them. This is a whole other topic. You have to know your threshold. And it's sometimes you do have to turn off. It's enough. You've had enough. You turn off the TV, turn off the social media, and go do your practice, whether it's an instrument or it's working with friends, gardening, cooking, yoga, whatever your practice is, you have to know your threshold. And if you're recognizing that you're beyond threshold, you're already well beyond threshold, because you only feel it when you're well beyond it. The subtleties have already been giving you the different hints. So that's my response to that, is know your threshold, know when to turn off, and know when to fill your cup back up. Because again, the way you treat yourself is the way you're going to treat others. And if you get full of anger, resentment, and that's all that's, when that's all that's going to spill out of your cup, because that's what your cup is full of. So you got to keep the love, you have to keep the peace, and do whatever it takes. And sometimes that does mean turning the world off and going back to your practice. That's my opinion, at least.
Thank you, Vikas. Thank you. Some last words on compassion. This was such a beautiful panel and unbelievable. I learned a lot. Thank you, everyone, for those beautiful sharing thoughts. How to come together. This is the question of human unity, basically, and these 3 steps of Vishnu. The first is family, first step. Second, nation, where in the nation you recognize the same family relations with people you do not know through culture, word, history, land. You have common grounds to share, and your soul can communicate with others directly with love. And then the final human unity, where it doesn't matter, where all the diversity is accepted as a joyful addition to this everlasting joy. So it's a big progress we have to make still. He's waiting for us. And if you have last words on this, please let us then round up with this, our panel. Some message to our listeners, to humanity, to yourself, to us.
I would say one of the things that came out of this, whatever unprecedented political divide or whatever you want to call it, is find common ground before building bridges. If we can't understand why someone we disagree with makes absolute sense, if we cannot truly understand their logic, then nothing we say is going to build a bridge. So I think if we dig deep enough, we will find common ground. We're all made up of the same stuff inside. We're 80% or more the same. So we can always bring things down and understand and find common ground before attempting to build bridges.
And I would say compassion helps us get there. It helps us find that common ground and be curious about why your strategy is so different from my strategy when we actually want the same things. And my closing words are just, I hope that in this moment and for the rest of the day, each one of us can practice compassion for ourselves and for whoever we encounter. May we live it today. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I'll just add to that there's compassion outwardly, and there's also compassion inwardly to those hurt, ashamed, difficult parts of ourselves, painful parts of ourselves. And if we can have compassion and a kind of loving holding of those parts of ourselves, if we can heal ourselves in that way, it then becomes more easy to heal outwardly.
Beautiful. Absolutely. Well, thank you all. Just really appreciate you sharing with us your insights and just your real life experiences and all this. And seems Vladimir has taken us to the heights, and we can still kind of stay one foot on the ground and come together between these two. So it's lovely to take off and then come back and land for a bit. But we thank you all. We thank our attendees for staying with us and showing up. And if you have any questions or comments, just feel free to email me at LaGrasse. It's on our website. And we just thank you all again so much for your wisdom today and sharing. Thank you all.
Thank you too, for doing this.
Well,
Namaste.
Namaste.